Well, we're back, everyone. Mr. Joe, it's good to see you. Glad that we can do this kids lesson number 10 in this quarter as we're studying the books of Deuteronomy and Joshua and Judges. So now we're in the book of Judges. And, you know, Mr. Joe, that whole book is really defined by the memory verse that the kids are learning right now.
Absolutely.
What was that memory verse again?
Okay, Judges 17 and verse 6. I think some of you are learning it, but we need some more of you to learn it. In those days there was no king in Israel, and men did what was right in his own eyes. Now, on Wednesday night, Mr. Wayne, he got the memory verse.
He got it.
You know, he got it. And it's like somebody else called in and got it too, but I forget.
So, you know, Mr. Joe, that memory verse is actually repeated 2 or 3 times in the book of Judges because God is repeating to us this idea again and again that when there is no king, in this case, when there's no strong leadership, the people are going to do whatever they want to do. They needed leadership.
Yes.
They weren't ready for a king yet, though.
Right.
So instead of a king, we had judges who were to come and give strong leadership to the people in a time of great need. Now, we've learned about a couple of judges already. Last week, we talked about Othniel, and we talked about Ehud. Now, we're going to talk about some more judges today. We're actually skipping over one, though, that the Bible talks about, the judge Shamgar. He was the 3rd judge. We're skipping over him, and we're going to talk about Deborah, who was the first and, well, the only female judge in Israel. And we're also going to talk about Gideon. So there's some interesting stories that are a part of the time of judging of Deborah and of Gideon, and that's what we're going to talk about today.
Sure. So, you know, think about the fact that God raised up judges for a purpose, to deliver and to lead Israel.
Lead them in a number of ways. They were oftentimes the military leaders. They were political leaders. And in some ways, they were even spiritual leaders.
Yes.
Not so much.
Some more than others.
Yeah, that's right. But more military, more political. But a judge would serve as the commander of Israel's army and would also try to encourage the people to do the right thing and to follow God. One of those commanders, we're going to talk about in a moment, was Gideon. And he won a very successful battle. Well, more correctly, we should say God won a very successful battle over the Midianites. But we're also going to talk about another commander, a man whose name was Sisera.
Sisera.
This is an interesting story because Sisera, unlike Gideon, he didn't know who his enemy was, and it ended up costing him his life.
Oh, boy, that's right. Now, the thing about Sisera as well, now, he's not on the Lord's team. He's not in the Lord's army.
That's right.
He's the commander of the Midianite army. That's the enemies of God. So Gideon was God's commander.
That's right.
Sisera was the commander of the Midian army.
So let's talk about this cycle again. You remember that we introduced a few lessons ago the idea of the cycle in the book of Judges. And hey, guess what? We finally remembered to get a graphic.
How about that?
So look, we have one. So let's talk about this cycle. At the very top, you see it says that Israel serves the Lord. But then if you move over, you see to the right, it says that Israel fails to do what God said. They started to turn away from God, and Israel would not believe in God. And then God would let an enemy come in and oppress them and make their lives really challenging and really difficult. And then the people would cry out to God and ask for his help. And God would raise up a judge who would come and deliver the people, who would then serve God again, and all would be well. Well, that is for a short period of time, right?
No, that's right.
So remember this cycle and how this works again and again and again. Mr. Joe, let's remember the book of Judges covers a period of about 400 years.
400?
So this cycle continues again and again for a long time.
Yeah, it does.
Ehud, he dies. And then Shamgar comes along, but we said we're skipping him. And now there's another enemy who is going to come and going to oppress Israel.
Well, you know, there's some other judges that come along, you know, to help the children of Israel. So after Ehud died, the people of God, well, they turned to idols again.
Imagine that.
You know, and so they're going around that cycle again. And God is angry with his people, and so much so that he let Jabin who was the king of Canaan, to come in to defeat them.
King Jabin of Canaan.
Yeah.
Okay. Need to remember that.
Now the thing about that is if they, you remember how God told them to clear out the land of all of the evil people? If they had done that, there wouldn't have been a King Jabin. That's right.
That's right.
And so that's part of the problem right there. Now the commander of Jabin's army was Sisera, as we were talking, Sisera.
Okay.
So this is when God sent a woman named Deborah to help lead the people, to be a judge and to deliver his people. Now Deborah is the only woman that we read about being a judge. And she worked together with Barak, I guess how you say it, Barak or Barak? Barak, you know, who's the commander of the Israelite army at that time, to defeat Sisera's army. Now, there's a pretty interesting kind of story that takes place.
I remember this story. This one's funny.
It's kind of gross.
It's not as gross as Eglon.
You know, that's true.
But it is. Okay. You're right. You're right.
Okay, so here we have when Deborah was the judge, the commander of the army was Barak, and he went out to defeat the enemies. Sisera was the commander. And so Sisera ran away from the army of Israel.
Like they lost the battle and he was running away.
Well, it's not all lost yet because he's still the commander.
Okay.
But he stopped at a tent, the tent of Jael. And that was a woman that he thought was on his side. Okay, so this becomes very important. You know, we really need to understand who our enemies are. And Sisera did not know who was his enemies, and he went into a tent of a woman, Jael, who he thought was on his side, but she wasn't.
Oh my. And so he goes into her tent, and then what happens?
Well, he was really tired because he'd been running all this way, and he was really tired, and he laid down and went to sleep. And when she came in...
Oh man, I don't know if you can see this, but we found a picture. Here is Sisera, the commander. He's laying down and he's asleep on the ground. And here's this woman, Jael, and Mr. Joe, she's got a hammer in her hand and a great big nail.
What is she going to do?
Well,
is she going to nail the tent?
Well, see, it looks here. There's a tent peg here in the ground. Maybe she's just making sure the tent doesn't fall down on him while he
I think
sleeps.
that's what... No,
that's not what it is.
No, that's not what happens.
Oh.
She sees Sisera, and she knows that he is the commander of the enemy's army, and she goes in, and she takes that tent peg and puts it right in his temple, and takes the hammer and nails it right in. I'm not kidding.
Are you serious?
That's what the Bible says.
She stuck him to the ground.
She killed him.
We might say she pinned him down.
Pinned him down.
Wow.
Okay, she killed him. See, again, something that we need to think about.
Oh, how awful.
We need to know our enemies.
Wow.
Wow. Yeah.
What a way to go. Oh, that's a terrible story. Wow. All right. Well, so Sisera's dead now.
Sisera's
He's
dead.
stuck to the ground.
Yep.
And now the Israelites, under Deborah's leadership, they're going to succeed, and they obey God for some time.
And maybe something we should say about Jael killing Sisera that way. This was God's way of punishing him. This was God's way of helping protect and take care of his people. You see, that was how God took care. He took the commander out, and so when you take the commander out, then you take command of the whole army.
I think the moral of the story is never go around a woman with a hammer. Maybe that's
something to think about, I will say.
All right, so under Deborah's leadership, the Israelites turned back to God, and they obeyed God for 40 years, Mr. Joe, for a long time.
Yes.
But guess what? Well, the cycle continues, and the people turned away from God again, and God is going to punish them. And now this time, he's going to use the Midianites.
Right, and we mentioned the Midianites back at the beginning, because this is sort of the bigger part of the story, not that the other part wasn't important. But now with the Midianites, okay, they're really raising havoc with the children of Israel. They're making things very difficult for the children of Israel. And so God sent an angel to Gideon to call him to be a judge for Israel. Now Gideon wasn't somebody. He wasn't somebody trying to be a leader or anything like that.
Quite the opposite, actually. He was kind of timid and kind of afraid.
God had to work to convince Gideon that he was on his side. Now here becomes another important point for our lesson, and that is trusting God's power. And, I don't think Gideon totally trusted God's power at first. And God had to prove that he was with him. Now, in time, Gideon, his faith grew.
That's right.
Okay, but initially, it just wasn't that way. And so God taught Gideon to trust him, and then he used Gideon to deliver his people from their enemies. And so Gideon, knowing that he had to fight against the Midianites, well, he gathered up a large army.
There was at least 50 people in it.
A whole lot more than that.
How many more?
Like maybe 32,000.
32,000 people?
Yeah, there was a whole lot of soldiers, thousands of soldiers.
I don't think I can count that high.
Well, no, I can't. So, imagine, it's a huge, huge army. And so, so here Gideon thought, okay, we're all set. We got this huge army. We're ready to go to battle. And God said, no, you have too many soldiers.
How can you have too many soldiers? There's never enough, right? That's probably what Gideon was thinking. No, we could use more, he probably thought. But God said, no, 32,000 is too many. You need a smaller army. And so he has Gideon dwindle the army down, or shrink the size of the army down to 10,000 people.
Yes. But you know what? It was still too many.
Still? God said it was still too many?
Yes. God is going to prove a powerful point here. That's what makes this story here just so interesting.
So God then says to Gideon, you take your soldiers and you go down to the water and have your soldiers get something to drink. And God has a way of narrowing down the soldiers from 10,000 down to 300 soldiers. And he says to Gideon, that's your army, 300 soldiers.
So they went from over 30,000 down to 300. And the way they did that, the way God did that, he said, take your men down to the spring of Harod, or Harod. It depends, people say it different ways. And so at this spring, it was like a cave, and the water came out of a cave. There's a spring there. And so the soldiers that went down to the water, and, well, you know what happens.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, look, and of course it's just a picture that somebody painted up. But look, we have soldiers here. Some of them are just...
So if you look closely, you can see some of them are dipping some buckets down in the water, or maybe using their hands to draw the water. Others, well, they're just sticking their head in the water, just shoving their face down right into the water. And God said to Gideon, if those... or the ones who put their hands down into the water and lapped it up, those are the ones that you keep in your army. Right. And there were only 300 people who did
300. Okay.
So he went from 32,000 all the way down to 300 people, and God says, perfect, we're ready to go.
So how would you feel about that?
And I don't remember, Mr. Joe, but the Midianites, they had...
It was a huge army.
They had a large army. I mean, in fact, 32,000 Israelites still wasn't enough.
So you see, I mean, the Midianite army, they were camped all out in that valley by the spring of Harod, and so there was just many soldiers that was there, and so Gideon, now he has 300 soldiers left, and so, well, you know what he did? In the middle of the night, Gideon and a couple of his men, well, they snuck over into the camp of the Midianites. Can you imagine this? It was during the night, and they had their camp set up in their tents, and they're sleeping maybe to go to battle the next day. And so Gideon snuck in over there, and he heard the soldiers talking.
I wonder what they were saying.
Well, the Bible tells us exactly.
What were they saying?
Okay, so they were really concerned. They knew that God was on the side of Gideon. That's what they were talking about. Oh. And so they knew they were in trouble already. And so when Gideon heard that, well, that gave him confidence. And his trust and his faith in God grew even more. And so, well, then he was ready to go to battle with his 300 soldiers.
All right, so the 300 soldiers, I'm guessing that they got in their tanks, and they got their machine guns, and they went up to the Midianite camp, and they just started blowing up the place, right?
No.
Is that what happened?
No, that's not the way it happened at all.
Well,
nothing like that.
Oh, okay. Well, what the Bible actually says is that they didn't even need weapons at all.
They didn't. They didn't. So they snuck back over in the night. And do you know what the soldiers carried? Yeah, you're not going to believe this. And so they went over there, and they had trumpets to blow, so they could make a lot of noise.
They could make a lot of noise with the trumpets.
And they had torches.
Yep, torches. And didn't they have some clay pots?
They did.
That they threw on the ground and broke?
So you know what that would sound like if you had a big clay pot and you're taking those and you're throwing them down and they break and they shatter and they make noise. And so they came up on the camp at night, and by now everybody's sleeping, and they snuck up, and when Gideon gave the signal,
all that noise,
blowing the trumpets,
and the Midianites woke up, they were so startled, they got really confused because God confused them.
They did.
And they started fighting each other.
They took out their swords and they killed each other.
And the Israelites didn't have to do a thing except blow the trumpets, smash the pitchers, and shout. And the point of all of this was that they were not the ones who won the battle. It was God who won the battle. Mr. Joe, this sounds a lot like the story of the Israelites marching around Jericho.
It does.
It was not the Israelites marching around that won the city of Jericho. God brought them victory. And it's the same thing here with Gideon over the Midianites.
I hope so much we can learn this lesson. I mean, that's why God has recorded it for us, so that we can see and understand that we've said it before. When God is on our side, then we can accomplish whatever He wants us to do. I mean, it is God's power, and we have to learn to have faith and trust in the power of God.
Yeah, that's right. So let's review these two commanders that we've talked about. Sisera. Mm-hmm. And we talked about the importance of knowing our enemies. Sisera thought that Jael was on his side. And so he put trust in her, even to the point that he goes into the tent and he lays down to sleep, thinking it's a safe place. And she killed him because he didn't know who she really was. But Gideon, he snuck into the Midianites' camp the night before battle. He heard what they were saying. He scoped out and he knew what they were afraid of. And he knew that God was with him. And because Gideon knew his enemy and because he trusted in God's power, the Midianites were defeated.
Gideon took time to learn his enemy. And also, during that process, his faith in God increased. And that was so important, that happened. I'm thinking that we need to understand our enemy.
That's right. It's important that we know who our enemy is. And the Bible, Mr. Joe, says that our enemy is Satan.
Right.
That our enemy, Peter says in 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 8, that he goes around like a lion seeking someone to devour. That Satan is hungry and he wants people to trap. He wants people that he can devour, that he can get caught up in sin. And so we need to know that Satan is our enemy. And we need to be aware of what he is trying to do to hurt us spiritually. And it may be that he uses other people. And he uses those people to challenge us and to make our lives more difficult. But sometimes, Mr. Joe, the enemy is things that we feel and things that we are within ourselves.
Sometimes we can become our own worst enemy. I know that sounds funny, but we can become our own enemy.
That's right.
I mean, if we harbor inside of us, if we harbor within us the wrong kind of feelings, what if we're selfish? What if we think only about ourselves and never about anybody else? Well, that's not the character that God would want us to have.
Yeah. Or what if we do something wrong and we try to hide it? You remember the story of Achan and what he did?
Oh, yeah, right.
Or we sneak around so we can do something bad because we don't want to get caught.
And well, what if our parents give us instructions on what we should do or how we should act, but what if we disobey them? What if we do not accept the authority of our parents? What
we
about
have a bad attitude toward them? Or maybe it's our language and the speech.
Yeah.
Maybe when we're around our parents, we use good language, but when we're around our friends and our parents are not around, maybe we use language that we shouldn't use.
That's right.
You see, all of that those are just examples of ways that the devil tries to get us. He is our greatest enemy,
Sure,
because he is trying to make us do things that upset the Lord.
That's right. So, wow, trusting in the power of God, knowing our enemies, accepting the direction that God gives. There's all kinds of lessons that come out of this.
And a lot of these lessons that we're talking about, these are kind of repeated ideas that we've seen in some of these stories.
Sure.
Well, that's all of our class for today. We thank you for studying along with us. Judges 17 and verse 6. Be working on your memory verse.